The true characteristics of the Communist Party are to be found not so much in its theories as in its methods of organization.
Comrades, our objective is not to win a debate. Our objective is to come to power.
They are applying a new concept of warfare, conquering a country from within.
If we are trying to take over a country, do we go into them and say, everybody, throw off your traditions and adopt communism? Of course not.
Aren't you rather silly? You conquer it by capturing the organizations that operate inside the country.
Then they will like us. Then they will support us. Then when we become their leaders, we can betray them. We don't have to win debates then, because if anyone disagrees with us, we shoot them.
Fast forward 60 years ahead, why is this message relevant today?
Now the storm clouds are overhead, and the lightning bolts are shooting down around our bodies right now. It's here.
I want to ask you about property rights, because whenever you hear of Marx, I always think about the abolition of property rights.
If you don't have property, you are property. A lot of the kids coming out of school, they say property is bad. They have no idea what they've stepped into.
Do we have a chance? Sometimes it's hard for me to tell if you're optimistic on the future or pessimistic.
I always think of that great documentary on the life of George Orwell. We see Orwell on his deathbed, and there's a lady there, and she says, well, Mr. Orwell, your book, 1984, presents a very grim picture for the future of mankind. How can we avoid this? Well, there's only one way. And then he looks right at the camera, and he says, don't let it happen.
It depends on you.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is G.Edward Griffin, the author, filmmaker, and researcher. You are the founder of Freedom Force International and the creator of the Red Pill University, with the mission to popularize a global coalition for the victory of individualism over collectivism and liberty over tyranny. You've written a number of best-selling books, including The Creature from Jekyll Island, which looks at the secret formation of the Federal Reserve and inspired a number of leading thinkers, including our friend Robert Kiyosaki. You were a central figure in the recently released documentary film Plandemic 3, The Great Awakening, where you discussed how communism is taking over America in a war to control the minds of the people. Ultimately, you believe that we must act now to stop the central bankers from destroying our freedoms and ushering in a new monetary system that will leave the vast majority of us with nothing. Ed, welcome to London Real.
Well, thank you for that great and succinct introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I think I'll start with the way a lot of people here probably know who you are, and that was this incredible presence you had in Mickey Willis's recent film, The Great Awakening, which is also known as Plandemic 3. We've actually had Mickey on the show, and Dr. Martin and Dell. We actually had all of them back on the show 3 years ago, and we helped live stream the first Plandemic, the second Plandemic, and we also live streamed the one you were in. And so I think a lot of our viewers will be very familiar with your major presence in that film. And you know, it was very powerful, Ed, you know, to see you in these kind of, I think they were colorized versions of black and white film that I believe you made happen a very long time ago. And then to have you come to life in the end of the film and go even deeper, it was really powerful. I would say everybody go watch this film. They can watch it on our Freedom platform at freedomplatform.tv. It's available elsewhere. But can you tell me a little bit about the film, some of the things you were talking about, and just what people can expect if they haven't yet seen it?
Well, you're talking about the recent film, but not the old ones.
Yeah, well, maybe both, because a lot of those old ones
yeah.
are featured, you know.
Yeah, I think to understand the current one, you have to understand those old ones, because that's really my origin. That's my roots. I caught fire. I discovered what the world was really like about 1960. Just a young guy, and I was in the corporate world. I had gone to school. I thought I was going to be into communications and acting and all that sort of thing. I went to school to have fun, you know, like a lot of people do. And I did have a lot of fun. I didn't learn too much, thank God, looking back in retrospect, because even at that time at the universities, they were teaching some pretty garbagey stuff, and I wasn't paying any attention. But anyway, I was having fun. I thought I would go into radio and television, and I did work in a television station, and I had my own radio shows and all that as a young guy. So I came out to Hollywood thinking that was going to be my life, and I discovered then that, well, there were a lot of young people there with talents much greater than mine, and they were washing cars and bussing dishes and waiting for that big moment, you know. By this time I was married. I had one child and half of one on the way. And I thought, I was running out of money. I said, this is not working. I think I better get a real job. So I went into the corporate world, and that's where we pick up the story. And I was climbing the corporate ladder. Then I came across some pamphlets and some literature that was sort of thrust at me. Didn't have much interest in it. But the first one I remember was a little blue booklet about the United Nations, revealing the secret truth about the United Nations. And of course, I was offended deeply, because I knew that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace. I knew that because I had learned that in school. Well, this pamphlet was saying that that was not true. So I got incensed, and I went to the library and did some original research, which surprised me. But I was curious about that. And I soon discovered from the books I read, mostly from pro-UN sources, that this pamphlet was right. There was a lot of chicanery going on there, a lot of deception, and it just jolted me. I discovered I had a crusader gene, and all of a sudden I was thinking about something other than myself. I was thinking about more than just, well, how much money am I going to make? How am I looking? What kind of a house am I living in? A nice enough car? All those materialistic things. All of a sudden, I began to be indignant about the fact that I was being lied to about something so important as the future of our country and the future of the world. And all of a sudden, I had this crusader gene rattling, and so I quit my job at the big corporate. It was a big insurance company, actually. It was Equitable Life Assurance Society. And I decided I was going to use what skills I had in the field of communications to do some agitating and some spreading of the truth of what I was learning. So I started to produce some very low-budget documentary films. Now we're into the track here. Very low budget. First, we started with film strips, as they called them in those days, which a series of still pictures on a roll of 35 millimeter film. And you set up the projector in the auditorium, and you start to play a recording, and that was the soundtrack. And at periodic points in the recording, there'd be a beep sound, and that's when the operator would turn the knob to the next frame. And it worked pretty good, but that was all we had. That was really low budget. And then we got really good. We got a couple of $1,000 donated to us, or invested, I should say, in us, to produce a 16 millimeter film. So that's when we started to use 16 millimeter black and white film. And we couldn't afford a studio, so we used my living room in my home as the studio. And it's a very small living room, but it looks pretty big in the video. We moved most of the furniture out and brought in some chairs where people could sit. We had our own little real audience there. Some of my family, some of my neighbors, some of my friends, some strangers we didn't know about. And so that's what we did. We recorded my presentation sitting on a bar stool in my living room before a group of about maybe 22 people, 25 people. And we plunged into some pretty deep stuff. And that's how it all started. And I made it a beginning with that. These films were cumbersome. They came in cases, and if you had a 90-minute film presentation, it usually required 2 rolls of film, And that had to be developed, and it was expensive. And by that, I mean, in those days, I think we sold those for about $350, which is a huge amount of money. So obviously, we didn't sell a lot of them, but we sold enough to make our money back and produce another film, which is how this whole thing started. So I talked about, in those days, I talked about the grand design, which was the communist revolution. Well, the grand design, really, I got that backwards, was about our foreign policy. And the one about communist revolution was called More Deadly Than War. And I did some things like that. And they were all in black and white. And naturally, most people were not interested in what I was saying. It really, I don't think it had too much to do with my inability to capture their attention. It's just that in those days, things were good. Who was worried about communism in America? Why, you got to be kidding. That's never going to happen in America. So people weren't interested. And I could see that the strategy that I had learned about was under play already. A little backstory on that might be of interest to your viewers. Is when I first started to become interested in these issues, I had a lot to learn. I sort of fell into the pattern that most people at that time were in who were concerned of these issues. And that pattern was to be concerned about communism. Well, there was good reason for that, because if you remember, back in those days, communism was taking over the world, had already taken Russia, had taken the Middle East, the Eastern Europe, it had taken Cuba, and it was working very actively in South America, Latin America, and we had a communist party in the United States. So all of a sudden you think, my gosh, well, these guys are serious. They're planning on taking over the world. So I became very concerned and interested in communism. What's this all about? I didn't understand it. So I decided I would go down to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles. It was called the People's Bookshop down at Larchmont Street. And for all I know, it's still there. I don't know. But it was there then, and it had a strange group of people in there. Some looked fairly normal, but a lot of them were more of the hippie types, you know. And the young comrades were in there volunteering their services. So I walked in. Of course, I've got my business suit on. I got my sideburns and the narrow tie. I'm strictly from the corporate world, and I felt really out of place in that bookstore, but they welcomed me. They tried to recruit me into the party. They invited me to some study groups, I think they called them. They were recruiting funnels. And so I wanted to learn about communism. I really did. So I bought a lot of books. In fact, I think I bought all of them. I still have them in my library, and I actually read them. I say actually read them because I discovered quickly that most of the comrades down there had not read them. They were selling them, but they had not read them. Their level of understanding of Marxism, or Marxism-Leninism, as another branch of it is called, was very shallow. These guys and women were working on slogans, and just slogans mostly, and illusions. And it all sounded good, like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's a nice slogan. What's wrong with that? Who could possibly be opposed to that? It's the basis of Christian charity, isn't it? You know, let's be against war and fascism and no exploitation of the poor and so forth. Let's bring peace to the world and get rid of racism and all these things. Well, let's sign me up. Let's go. But that's where the comrades were at in the bookstore. But I read their stuff, and I actually read the collected works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. And that's where you really get into the sticky stuff. Lenin was the theoretician of the Communist Party. Marx had nothing to do with the Communist Party. He was just a writer, a theoretician, an ideologue, and most of his ideas weren't his at all, I found out later. He was merely repeating what he had heard from others. But his book got published, and so his name is attached to those ideas. But they're all ideas, and I learned quickly that no country had ever fallen to Marxism. No country had ever fallen to the theories of Karl Marx in Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, because it was all theory about social order and economics and markets and things and exploitation of the worker. It was all the hype to get people angry and say, we've got to do something better than that. Where you really get into the nitty-gritties is where you start to read Lenin. Now, Lenin was a Marxist, of course. That was the foundation of his whole ideology. But he came to the very practical conclusion that theoreticians don't come to power. Militants come to power. People with guns and bayonets come to power, but not people who write books. And he said, comrades, our objective is not to win a debate. Our objective is to come to power. And so he formed the Communist Party and developed strategies and tactics not to win debates or to win the hearts and the minds of the people, but to come to power. And that's where you really learn about what we're up against. Because his theme, although he was a prolific writer and wrote many, many, many essays, there was a theme that ran through almost all of them. And it went something like this. He would say, comrades, if we are trying to take over a country, and the country has a strong tradition of the culture that's different from ours, and they're strongly nationalistic, and they like their traditions, do we go into them and say, everybody, let's become internationalists and throw off your traditions and adopt communism? And he said, of course not. Don't be silly. Why, they would never do that. So what we must do is go in and say, we love these traditions. We are nationalists. We hate communists. We are anti-communists. We want to fight against communism. He said, then they will like us. Then they will support us. Then they will follow us. They will make us their leaders. And then when we become their leaders, we can betray them. And then he said, we don't have to win debates then, because if anyone disagrees with us, we shoot them. Now that in a nutshell is Lenin. And if people don't understand that, they don't understand what they're up against, because that's what the world really is being driven by. It's not communism or Marxism or socialism. It's being driven by Leninism, which is coming to power by any means whatsoever. So that's what I did. Brian, I got into all of that stuff. And you asked me, how did that happen? And just sort of one step after the other, just exploring and learning. And each step I took, and at every level of enlightenment that I was able to achieve, I became more enraged, more alarmed, more determined to get the word out about it. And it's just the pattern of my life ever since then. It's been pretty much the same, except for the fact that in those days, I had no idea how deep and how huge this topic was. Each time I learned something, I think, well, now I got it. And then I discover a month later, well, no, that was just the beginning. There's something else to learn. And that process is still going on.
Wow.
And well, go ahead. I think that's enough. That probably answers your question.
No, that was fantastic. So first of all, I have a soft spot for independent media because 12 years ago I started this program. And at the time I had YouTube, which I've struggled with for censorship recently, but we'll talk about that later. But the fact that you were able to create your own media, back in the 60s, by any means necessary with these various tools and using your living room and, barely scraping by to get the money to do it. I mean, I find that really inspiring. And obviously a lot of that was used in the Great Awakening. Fast forward 60 years ahead, why is this message relevant today? Because it clearly is, because it was a big part of that film. Why do people need to know about this today, especially in America?
Well, I think that's almost self-evident that what I was talking about back in the 60s was more in terms of, hey, everybody, if we don't stop this process, something really bad is going to happen in the future. Look over there. Don't you see those storm clouds on the horizon over there? They could come here. So that was then. And that's why most people weren't interested, because now those storm clouds are little ones and they're way away. They're not going to come over here. So now why is it relevant today is because now the storm clouds are overhead and the lightning bolts are shooting down around our bodies right now. It's here. So nobody can be so complacent anymore. And I seldom hear people say, well, that could never happen here in America, because it is happening. And it's pretty clear that we're coming to the final stages. the window of opportunity to avoid the total collapse and calamity of society and civilization, literally, is closing. The time span is narrowing. We have to act now. So even the most willfully blind person to these things has to admit that it's happening, and it's going to affect their lives very negatively if they don't do something about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I went to Boston to go to school, and I graduated in '93. And I went back to Boston last year because my daughter is going to school there, and she just visited over the summer. And I kind of asked her in passing, I'm like, are people really talking about communism there? And she's like, yeah, the students talk about it seriously, like it's a viable option. And that wasn't happening in my school in '93. I remember seeing the Che Guevara shirts, and stuff was coming out, but it was interesting for me to hear what's actually being talked about on university campuses, let alone what you're seeing the population talk about, let alone if you start taking it down the road of, the Federal Reserve and, CBDCs and UBI and all these other things that are coming. What are the things that you're seeing that shows that there are a part of the population that is really trying to go into socialism, which maybe then goes to communism? What are the things that you see that are these lightning bolts around us? And then how do you make those things clear to people as dangers?
That's a tough one to answer because it's a tough one to know where to start. There's so many things. I think all of the items that are of concern to me are destructive in nature. And by that I mean they're destructive of those pillars of tranquility and prosperity and liberty that we've enjoyed. I've enjoyed it most of my life. I mean, I've always been free to travel wherever I wanted to. I've always been free to express an opinion, even if it was unpopular. I've always been free, to say what I want, no matter, as long as I don't lie and injure their reputation or cost them their jobs or something like that. I can say, I don't like you. I think you're a so-and-so. I don't like your attitude. You're always too negative. You're always looking for fault. I could say that. Today, I can't do that. Somebody will say, well, you hurt my feelings, and I could go to prison. So that kind of thing, it wakes you up when you're used to having this thing called liberty and living in a system of freedom, and you see all these liberties and freedoms being taken away one by one, and with the approval of everyone. Everybody says, well, yeah, we don't like that, but it's necessary, for the greater good. It's necessary for society. If we don't do all these things we don't like to do, well, it's really good. Then it's really going to be bad. So in order for us to be good citizens and to do what we should do as good boys and girls, we have to go along with these tyrannical directives. That's what scares me the most, is the fact that people have conditioned themselves to think that they have to comply with this growth of tyranny because it's for the greater good of the greater number. And of course, that is one of the dictums of collectivism, is that any atrocity, any assault against our liberty, anything that's unreasonable or horrible can be justified as long as you can say that it was for the greater good. We can have false attacks on Pearl Harbor, which we did, and then we explained it to the people. Well, that was an act of statesmanship that President Roosevelt did to get us into the war, because if we had waited any longer, then the casualties of war would have been greater. And so you see, by getting into the war quicker and by deliberately killing 3,000 or 4,000 American sailors and convincing them that we didn't know about the pending attack and all that sort of thing, that was an act of statesmanship. And on it goes. You can look at 9/11. We knew that those guys were coming, and we didn't really do anything about it because we needed to get into this war against terrorism and back in the Middle East. And also we had to solidify our oil pipelines and a few things like that. So it was for the greater good, especially for the greater good of Americans. So to answer your question, I think the most alarming thing to me is that not all of these negative things that are happening, but that they're happening with so little pushback and so little concern on the part of the people that it's affecting. And they're taking it, they're accepting it because of this mantra of the greater good of the greater number. And now we're back to this issue of collectivism again, because that is one of the cornerstones of collectivism, is the false belief that these things are for the greater good.
And how did we get here? I mean, when you talk about in the 60s, how the communists are infecting all things around the world, how they plan on doing it, how they plan on stirring up social disorder, was this them running their playbook, or was this something that also happened organically, or is this something that is going to potentially infect any individualist society or capitalist society?
A very profound question, because one is tempted to say it's always going to affect a individualist society, because it always has, or at least in the lifespan that we've seen collectivism mature. It's a relatively new phenomenon, actually, in history. But so we say it always has, so therefore it always will. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think it always has to. It's only because the victims are not aware of the strategies and tactics being used against them. I don't know how to play tennis, but I understand that if your opponent has a good, strong serve, and he can hit the ball in a certain way that it spins and bounces and goes sideways, then you better learn how to counter that serve and anticipate it, or you're going to lose the game every time. So it's in that kind of a fashion. We know now what these people do. We know what their serves are. We know what their tricks are, their strategies, and we better study them hard so that we don't fall for them or be fooled by them again and again and again. So I think the answer to that question is that it's not inevitable. It's inevitable only so long as we don't take an interest in what's going on and decide to fight back, which seems to be the pattern. Now, the next question is, well, why is that? And I think the answer was in the word you used, that you said the communists were infecting society. It's a good word, because it is something that's not natural, and it does infect and get into the healthy tissue, and it can weaken the tissue and possibly even kill it if you don't get rid of it. So one of the favorite tactics of communism, or I should say of Leninism, because that's what Lenin taught, is to infect society, not to attack it from the outside with guns and bayonets, but to infect it from the inside by infiltrating into the power centers of society and leading people through rational arguments, or supposedly rational arguments, on behalf of collectivism, such as from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. These are attacks on the mind, not against the body. So Lenin made that very clear. He said, we have to go into all of the power centers of society. We have to go into the political parties, the church organizations, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, any organization where people gather together and have leaders and follow their leaders. We have to make sure that we are or can influence the leaders of those organizations. That gives us that multiplying power of a few being able to lead the many, because they'll never have enough leaders if you have to lead one-on-one. They prefer to lead one on 100 or one on 1,000 or one on 100,000. That's the way they work. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually, because that's how society works. But the enemies of freedom have studied that phenomenon very carefully, and they've mastered it, and they teach courses on it. It's like taking a course in advertising. There are certain tricks you use. You could trick people's minds and get them to want to buy that hamburger, even though they're vegetarians. Now all of a sudden they got to buy that hamburger because you've shown them the picture, and you've got some pretty girl smiling as she's eating the hamburger, and you want to be there, or whatever it is. They play on the mind. And so that's how the communists and others, not just the communists, but others, are able to what's the word I'm looking for, amplify their effect, not one-on-one, but one against 10 or one against 1,000, by controlling the power centers and the groups to which people belong. There's one other aspect that comes to mind. I think I'd like to jump the track to it before I forget it, because I think it's very important, Brian. Back in that day, we were properly concerned about communism. But I wasn't yet aware of this thing called collectivism. To me, it was we had America, we had Russia, we had China, we had different countries, and we had freedom, we had tyranny, and we had communism, we had Americanism, and that was it. Labels were good enough. I didn't realize until when I got into the study of communism, and I had immersed myself in all the socialist and Leninist literature, and then branched out and decided to look at Adolf Hitler's stuff. I read Mein Kampf, and then I started to read Mussolini's stuff, and all of the literature that came from the most prominent tyrants of the time. And I discovered that although they appeared on the surface to be opponents to each other, such as the Nazis fighting to the death against the communists in World War II, to the death. I mean, millions of people lost their lives in the fight between communism and fascism, Nazism. So we get the impression that those are opposites, all right? But they're not opposites, I discovered. Everything they believe, everything that Hitler wrote was in the Communist Manifesto, all of it. In fact, Hitler formed the National Socialist Party. That's what Nazi stands for, National Socialist Party. Hitler was a socialist, not a Nazi. He was a socialist, and he was proud of it. But he fought against the other socialists in Russia. Why? Because they disagreed on principle? No. Why did they fight? Over territory.
Right. Power.
Power. Who was going to be the top dog? That's all they were fighting for. And once I got that picture, all of a sudden everything changed. Then I began to look more objectively around me, and I discovered pretty late in the game, unfortunately, that while we were fighting communism and concerned about that, we were accidentally or unknowingly creating the same thing in America. In the name of fighting communism, we were creating something just the same under the general concept of, well, if you're going to fight a dictatorship, you have to be a dictatorship, because dictators can move quickly without having to worry about constitutions. So if we want to be victorious against the dictator, we have to be a dictator too, so we can move as quickly. It was that kind of thinking. I thought, oh my gosh, and I was part of that. I thought that since communism was on the left, and Nazism or fascism was on the right, if you wanted to be against communism, you had to be on the right, because communism was on the left. And if you're on the right, well, that makes you a Nazi or a fascist, right? Wow, wait a minute. Is there no other choice? They didn't want us to have any other choice.
Right.
So no matter which side we were on, we were just on two wings on the same ugly bird called collectivism. It's all the same. And so once I got that idea, I could see that collectivism, or another name for communism, was being built in America in the name of fighting communism. And that changed my life. And that's become my driving motive ever since, is to get this one fact clearly understood by the populations of the world, because if they don't understand it, they're going to be stuck between choosing one or the other, thinking they have chosen opposites, but instead they've chosen exactly the same thing. If they think that Democrats and Republicans are against each other, just take a look at their voting history over the past 100 years. No matter who's in office, nothing really changes. And once you get that picture, your whole worldview changes.
It's so powerful what you just said. The illusion of choice surrounds us all the time. And I always love a restaurant analogy. If you go to a dinner here in London, the waiter come up and say, would you like still or sparkling water? And you look at him and you make a choice, and then you realize, I just bought something that I didn't want, right? Would you like red or white wine? It's like, well, actually, I'm not going to drink, thank you very much. And so, and I just had a flashback after 9/11, they put all of the sweeping surveillance through with the CIA in the name of collectivism, right? So we gave up all of our individual rights to fight terrorism, or to fight this, and then again we've now just become just like them, like you said, just
exactly. So how can we fight terrorism Well, by giving up our liberties.
Right.
By allowing our government to take our liberties. Right. So now we don't have to worry about the terrorists taking away our liberties. We've just given them away.
Exactly.
To our own government. And since it's our own government, well, that's different, you see.
Right.
But that's how it works.
And supposedly the terrorists are attacking us because of our liberties, right? They don't like our liberties, or they don't like...
Oh, they don't care about our liberties.
You're right.
In fact, they love our liberties. They want to have those liberties, but they don't want us to have them.
Right. It's a power grab. That's really powerful, what you just said. And I think a lot of people are resonating with it. You know, Ed, I always part of my brain used to always think, yeah, what is the difference? What is a fascist? I was thinking, like, what is a fascist versus a communist? And I could never really figure it out. And like you said, National Socialist Party for Hitler, all of this stuff is really clicking. I want to ask you about property rights, because whenever you hear of Marx, I always think about the abolition of property rights. When I think about freedom, I always associate with property rights, being able to own something. And I've gone deep on freedom of speech in the last few years, and also with a lot of the digital assets like Bitcoin, et cetera, people that can actually own something that a lot of times means that you can keep your freedoms. And if you can defend that property, sometimes with the right to bear arms, you can also keep those freedoms. How important is property ownership when it comes to this individualism versus collectivism argument?
Well, it's very, very important. And and as a matter of fact, it's one of the most difficult things I've had over the years to get my brain around, or to the point where I could explain it adequately to somebody. It's one of those things that you say, oh, I get it, I understand it now, and then it's gone. Oh, wait, where was I again? And go back and cry. And the reason it's so subtle is because it's not clear as to what ownership means. And until that word is sort of cleared up, then it's hard to come up with an answer to this question. So let's start with that. What is ownership? It's very simple. It has different definitions in different dictionaries, but they all boil down to one thing. Ownership is the legal right to have access and control to something tangible. They call that property. The legal right. Now, what does that mean, the legal right? Well, that means, if you want to strip it down to its fundamental, the right that is approved by the culture within which you live. And it's not all the same around the world. So we may say that our concept of property is better than somebody else's. And here in America, and most of North America, the idea of private ownership of property is well accepted as part of our culture. And it's one of the reasons I believe that we've always had in the past a high level of liberty, is because part of the property we need to be free is to be self-sustaining, to provide our own food, to take care of ourselves, and not be dependent on the state. Because if we ever get to the point where we have to depend on the state for our food and shelter and health care and everything, well, then we have to be subservient to the state. He who pays the piper calls the tune. And that, in essence, is the whole answer to this question about property. If you don't have property, especially property over the things you need to survive, like your food, your land, you can grow food, you have property over your money, and so you can buy things, you have a house to live in or a place to live. If you don't have any of those things, then if you don't have property, you are property. That's the bottom line. Somebody owns those things, or in the context of controlling them, somebody owns them. They may not have a piece of paper that has their name on it and an address and say, I own that. But if you're a bureaucrat or a political leader or corporate leader, and you can have access to the corporation airplane or limousine, or live in the villa that's provided for you, you don't have to have your name on a piece of paper to own it. You do own it because you have the right to access it exclusively if you wish. So with that understanding, we come back to the issue of, well then, is all property the same? And this is where I had the biggest problem, and it's only recently that I was able to break through on that. And that is that, no, not all property is the same. Now, we have a right. I'll have to digress for a minute. One of the things I think we need to take a look at is, what is the proper function of the state? And that becomes important because the question really is, what are those things that we agree that the state should be able to use coercion against us? Coercion, including lethal coercion. What are the things that the policeman who we hire and give a gun to, what are the things we want him to use that gun for? That's a pretty serious decision, because that means they can use it on us too. So we have to give some thought to that, and nobody ever gives any thought to that. They figure, well, we hired him, so therefore that'll all turn out fine. No, it doesn't turn out fine at all. So in my view, the proper function of the state, or the proper function of lethal force, if necessary, is limited to only those things that an individual himself could use lethal force for. Because we assume in our part of the world that the proper function of the state is derived from the consent of the citizens. And we'd like to believe that. And it should be that way, I believe. And if that's true, well, then that means that the state can only do those things which the citizens themselves can do. Because if the state gets its power from the citizens, and the citizens don't have the power to do something, they can't delegate that to the state. So that means that the state is limited to the use of lethal force, to the same things and only the same things that an individual can use lethal force for. Now we come closer to your question, which is, well, what are they? Well, that's in the defense of life and liberty. I don't think very many people would say it was unethical or immoral to use lethal force or physical force against another human being in the defense of their own life or their own freedom. They don't want to be slaves, they don't want to be killed. And so most people would say, well, they had it coming, they were trying to kill this poor bugger and he fought back. So there you have it. I think it's so simple and so clear that we have that right, and therefore we can delegate the right to use lethal force to the state in the defense of our lives and liberty, but nothing more. It's a big door that should be closed right there. We have no other justification for the use of violence ourselves, so therefore our lawful state should be limited to those things also. So now, where does that lead us? In terms of property? Now, why is property important? It's because not all property is important, but certain types of property, we have a right to use force on others to protect and defend. And what's the difference between the two? If we don't get that difference, it's mushy, because it's obvious that if somebody's trying to take away your liberty or your property or your house, or if you're in a primitive society and you finally dug a little dugout and made a little hut and you're living in there, and somebody comes along and tries to take you out of the hut and they want your hut and you fight back, it's justified. Why? Because you need that hut to protect your life. You need to be protected against the shelter, and you might need the tools that are in there, so that a hoe or a rake or something so you can plant food. You need those certain things to survive for your life and your liberty. Now, you don't need a pencil for that, so I can see its justification. You can fight to defend your home and your life, but you can't use violence to punish somebody because they stole your pencil, for example. That's way off the chart. So now we have to come to this decision of there are two kinds of property. One I would call intrinsic, which means necessary for the protection of life and liberty. And then the other is convenience property. Now, that's why we have courts, for us, to decide which is which and where the dividing line is. There's got to be a gray area, of course, in the middle. But the principle, nevertheless, is clear. When we say that property rights are a human right, we're not necessarily talking about the little things. We're talking about the essential things for your defense of your own life and your own liberty. So that's why property is important, because if you don't have property, you cannot defend yourself and your liberty. And that's it. It's a simple thing. Now, you don't have to go beyond that. You get into literary rights and so forth. Those are gray areas where you might need to go to court. But the principle is that property rights are a human right, and they cannot be denied because they're the same right to life and liberty.
And so can you determine the amount that...
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.